Real produce. There we go. Okay. And then, yeah, if you can make that the presenter screen, perfect. I see it. All right.
Oops, sorry.
Now, no, you're good. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our next session, Prepare to Care with Trisha San Diego. Am I saying that correctly,
Yep,
Trisha?
that's right.
Trisha San Diego, Director of AARP Programs, is a certified health education specialist, CHES, experienced in health communication and promotion and public health research and practice. Trisha has led employer outreach work for AARP, equipping employers with practical tips, guidance, and free resources on issues that impact the age 50 plus population. She's a family caregiver herself in the sandwich generation, which I think we are talking about later on today, providing care for her parents as well as her young children. Welcome, Trisha. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kara. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I really appreciate your attention. If you need a moment to sort of stretch between sessions and get up and get blood flowing, feel free to do that. I really encourage this to be as interactive as possible. So we have prompts, and if you are comfortable sharing, please drop some feedback in the chat or comments or questions that you have. I believe we use the Q&A function for the questions, but feel free if they come to mind throughout the presentation to enter them in at any time. And at the end, we will have time for questions. But thank you so much. Let's see if I can move my slide. Have to do the disclaimers just as a heads up. This presentation is intended to just provide the general guidance. It's not specific legal, financial, or health advice. Please be sure to consult with professionals for specific advice regarding your own individual personal situations. Another disclaimer, I believe the session is going to be recorded and likely shared with other members in your association, your organization. So as much as I want this to be as interactive as possible and engage you in conversation, please do not share anything overly personal, legal, financial, or health information about you or your loved one, just so that you're not doing anything overly confidential, anything that you're not comfortable with. So today's session is called Preparing to Become a Family Caregiver. I will say that I think the title of our session is a little misleading because this session is not just for those who are in preparation mode. This session is really about taking a step back from your caregiving situation, if you're currently in one, and just getting your bearings. What we're going to give you today is a framework on how you can sort of organize and determine your caregiving situation. There's no one size fits all approach. And so this framework is sort of flexible and can apply to all different kinds of caregiving journeys. Whether you are preparing and sort of not quite in the throes of caregiving, or if you are in the throes of it, or if you've been doing this for decades. So this really is for any caregiver at any point in their journey. We will provide you with resources, and we will hope to have some time for answer some questions that you may have about family caregiving. We do kind of have a lens of work and caregiving because we know a lot of us are balancing full-time or part-time daytime jobs while also doing this other job. And so you'll hear a lot of references to that. Just a quick note about who we are. I think you are familiar with us by now. We are AARP. Our mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And what might be surprising to some is that our mission doesn't restrict on how old you need to be to sort of be interested in the topics that AARP provides. It's at any age, no matter what age you are. We want to empower people to choose how they live as they age. We know that caregivers in particular are not necessarily just older adults, but they do span across generations. And so we do feel like this is an important aspect of our caregiving topic today. We have a couple links there for you, and we'll have lots of links and resources throughout. As Kara introduced, I'm Trisha San Diego. I'm a director in our programs group at AARP. I lead AARP's employer outreach strategy. And I will say, as she mentioned, I'm a caregiver myself. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want you to know about me is that I can relate. I am in the throes of it, I would say. My father has Parkinson's disease and he's 87 years old. And only just this year have we seen a lot of progression in terms of his disease advancing. And it's become very difficult managing all the care coordination, the physical care aspects, the emotional aspects of caregiving while also doing my job. I identify as being in the sandwich generation, which Veronica will be speaking about later today. Sandwich generation means you're caring for multiple generations. I have young children at home in elementary school, as well as my own sort of individual family, in addition to taking care of my aging parents. And it's a lot. In fact, I actually call myself a panini generation, not sandwich generation, but you'll have a lot more to learn. And in fact, I think all of our speakers today are caregivers, and so we understand sort of the day to day what you all may be going through if that's what you're in the middle of right now. Introduce yourself if you all don't mind engaging in the chat today, or if you just sort of want to make a mental note. These aqua colored slides are where we have prompts for you, have questions, some knowledge checks. So it would be great to see the feedback from you all. Let me know who you are and who you're caring for, or who are you preparing to care for. And if you're in the sandwich generation, it may be multiple folks. Is it your father, your mother, in-laws, siblings, neighbors, friends? And let us know what you want to learn about. I hope to, if I can, multitask and sort of hit on some of the points that you all are interested in today. So if the chat function is open, feel free to sort of drop things in the chat and let me know a little bit about yourself and what you want to learn about. We want to make these sessions as actionable and helpful to you as possible and practical. I know it's a lot of us talking, but I hope it's what you all need and can help you take a step back to get your bearings on your caregiving situation. So our agenda today, first, we're going to talk about why a care plan is valuable for employees and employers. I mentioned I lead our employer strategy, so we have sort of a working family caregiver lens in this discussion because that just adds another layer of complexity. And so we will talk about the why. Why is it an important issue? Then I'll talk about the how and make it, I hope, as practical and hands-on and actionable for you as possible to figure out your caregiving situation. And if there's a specific, issue or problem you're trying to solve, hopefully we can help you with that. Then we'll lead to Q&A, and I have FAQs as well as tons and tons of resources to use and share, just as Amanda did such a good job with sharing in her previous session. So first and foremost, we always start with this quote. I won't read it out loud, but essentially the whole quote from former First Lady Rosalind Carter here is to show that everyone in some point in their lives probably has some sort of caregiving responsibility. Caregiving impacts everyone at some point. And so it is a universal experience in the sense that, if you're not one now, you may be one later, or maybe you were one in the past, or maybe you may be someone who needs care at some point. So caregiving is intersectional in that way. But as universal as the experience is, it's not a one size fits all approach, as I mentioned earlier. As much as we just want sort of a prescription of what to do in your caregiving situation, there's so many different permutations. And we'll see a little bit of that in, I think, the next couple of slides that we have. I say it's still a secret second job because, let's admit it, caregiving is work. Yes, I think it's very much so a duty and an honor. And there are tons of benefits and rewarding aspects to being a family caregiver and providing that support to someone you care about and love. But it's work. And if you are already balancing a daytime job, that's a lot of hours to be, as soon as you're home from that or sign off from work, to kind of switch into caregiving mode. And that can take a lot of hours. And not a lot of people identify as caregivers. So you wouldn't maybe look at it as more work or a second job, but it's hours out of your time to help someone, and it can be challenging. And we know that not everyone talks about it. 7 out of 10 US workers are caring for an adult, a child, or both at any given point in any given company. And only half of family caregivers disclose or tell their supervisors, and 2/3 expect to have trouble juggling work and caregiving this year. If you're in the throes of it like me, I'll admit, I mean, I'm in the most supportive of jobs when it comes to my caregiving situation, and it still is a challenge trying to juggle all these balls. And I think employers tend to underestimate how many people are caregiving and how much it does impact your life. Let's take a quick poll here, and the poll is just done in the chat, not in any sort of poll function. But if you can drop in the chat what you think the percentage of family caregivers are who are men. Is it A, 25% of family caregivers are men? B, 19% of family caregivers are men? Or C, 39%? So drop that in the chat, and I'm seeing some great engagement. Thank you for introducing yourselves. Hopefully when I get a chance, I'll read through and learn about you all. But the answer is actually C. Here in our first bullet, 4 in 10 caregivers are male. And that might be surprising for some of us. I think you stereotypically might think of a family caregiver as a woman in her, 50s, or a spouse, providing care to their loved one. And females do over-index, but maybe through time, those demographics have changed, and more men are stepping into that role. So 4 in 10 are male. 3 in 10 family caregivers are under the age of 40. And that could be surprising because sometimes you think this is just an older adult issue and that caregiving may not necessarily impact the younger generations until their parents get older. But we see a lot of different generational caregiving, young generations caring for people like grandparents or being secondary caregivers. Sometimes they are the primary. So caregiving can hit at any age. In fact, 50% of all family caregivers in the US are under the age of 50. And especially when you look at that from sort of the work lens, there are young employees who are managing a new job, a new professional career, and maybe just getting out of school and now also having to juggle caregiving when they're not maybe as socialized to some of the older adult issues, things like Medicare, navigating the healthcare system, Social Security. They may not be as informed on some of those topics, and so a little bit less prepared. We have 1 in 11 is a veteran, 1 in 12 is LGBTQ. Every new generation of caregivers is more diverse. So I said there's no one size fits all approach. We say if you've met one caregiver, you've met one caregiver. And that's because the different permutations of who they are, what the situation is. People could be long distance caregiving. If anyone on here is long distance caregiving, there could be people who live with their care recipient. And so that's totally different end of the spectrum. There's all different diseases, conditions that you may be supporting your care recipient with, chronic conditions or acute care, and just all different types of dynamics in terms of who you're caring for, the different sandwiches that you might be. So just all that to kind of give you a glimpse of what caregiving is currently like right now. And I will say we use the term family caregiver to distinguish those of us who are caring for a loved one at home. And this is often an unpaid job that's different from sort of the paid caregivers who are more formally in that role. We are distinguishing those of us who are family caregivers versus paid caregivers. And when we say working family caregivers, we mean people like myself who are juggling a daytime, part-time, full-time job while also doing this other job of caregiving. So here's our aqua slide. If you have a minute, please drop in the chat if you're willing your guess. During the average 5-year caregiving phase, so if you're caregiving for 5 years, what amount of pre-tax earnings will an average family caregiver spend out of pocket? So this is just thinking about your financial health and how much caregiving impacts your out-of-pocket expenses in 5 years. How much do you think that is? Is it A, 7,200, B, 36,000, or C, 41,700? Thank you for your guesses. Drum roll, please. The answer is down here in aqua. When we're talking, oops, I'm sorry. When we're talking about pre-tax, it's actually 41,700. So I think that was answer C, if you got that correct. Family caregivers are under financial pressure. On average per year, we spend $7,200 on out-of-pocket costs due to caregiving responsibilities. So that's separate from what your care recipient and any assets they may have that you're using, any benefits. On top of that, there's usually this additional expense that some caregivers may have to take on or are willing or want to take on for their loved ones. The calculation, this is really technical and we might not need to get into it, but the calculation of those pre-tax earnings is in that next paragraph there. So if you're a caregiver for 5 years and we have 7,200 per year, that gets us to the $36,000 after tax dollars, but the quiz question was about pre-tax. And so pre-tax, we added a tax rate average percentage to calculate that 41,700. If you think about that, imagine again, like if you're in certain industries and not making as high income, 41,700 can be a large proportion of your income, and you may just not be able to sort of work with that, and that can be very debilitating for savings in the future, retirement savings, or for those younger caregivers who may be just starting their careers. As I mentioned, if they're on the lower side of income, 41,700 can be a large proportion of that. And that number can double if you're long distance because you're outsourcing a lot of services. Or those who are longer term caregivers, I mentioned people who may be caring for someone with a chronic condition for decades. That can be very, very debilitating for your financial security. I mentioned the workplace. Here's just a quick note about what it's like maybe being an employee and during your daytime job, what your experience might be. You might be concerned about whether your career is in jeopardy. If you are to mention anything about caregiving, we really encourage to reduce any stigma that might be associated with sharing your caregiving situation. And we want to reduce any biases that come along with that. Employees are very stretched, but still professionally motivated. People are often thrust in their caregiving situation when it comes to older adults or caring for adults age 18 plus with disabilities. That experience might be a little bit different from caring for a young child. When you're having a baby, it's a little bit more predictable. You usually have on average about 9 months to kind of prepare for that at least, and to give notice and have a predictable amount of leave that you're going to take. And family caregiving for older adults or adults age 18 plus might be a little bit less predictable or linear. Managers, if you're managing at work and you manage a team of people, maybe you are grappling with wanting to be as supportive as possible, but you don't know how. You don't know how to be inclusive of all types of caregivers. You also may be accountable for your business objectives. And so there is that hard balance of wanting to provide flexibility, but that would, impact your business objectives and goals. You may or may not be aware of unconscious bias in play. So again, let's not make assumptions of what caregivers may need or want, because as I said, every caregiver journey is different. And then you may value high performance and retention on your own team, and you're learning that being inclusive of caregivers actually helps things like talent management and talent recruitment and retention. So that was just sort of a deeper dive on the working family caregiver experience, because we know our situations may be a little bit more complex because you don't have that time and you need that financial income from your employment in order to provide and support your own living situation, as well as maybe needing to help support the caregiving situation. Okay, so let's talk about one thing that you wish people understood about the stress you may experience balancing work and caregiving. This is an open-ended, just sort of moment of reflection. I'm sure there might be times when you feel like no one understands what you're going through. Caregivers often feel isolated or lonely. It's hard sometimes emotionally to share the situation that you may be going through, and um, and so people don't know, and also because some of us don't identify as being a caregiver, it sounds so formal, right? Then you don't kind of think about this, but just think about, what is something that you wish other people knew, and maybe that's something you may be willing to share later on. And drop it that in the chat. Okay, so we are going to go on to the next step, which is creating a care plan and a care team. This is my sort of practical, hands-on, actionable side to this part of the session on preparing to become a family caregiver. Most of the content here is going to come from this bread and butter resource guide that we have. You'll probably hear about this multiple times today because we do think and we know that it has been helpful for people who are caregiving. So it's a workbook, essentially. It's called AARP's Family Caregiving Guide. We have the QR code there if you want to take your mobile phone camera app and scan that and save it and share it with others, because it really is a good first step in sort of getting your bearings on your caregiving journey. An added bonus, this is created in multiple versions. We have Spanish language, we have Chinese language, we have LGBTQ, military veteran, family caregiver. So all different kinds for you to be able to take on like which one is most relevant to you and your family. So here are the 5 steps that are listed in that family caregiving guide. And we'll start the conversations. And here's just sort of a quote that we hear, and it's similar to what we hear often from other caregivers. But does this resonate at all with anyone here? I'm already a solo mom, and now my parents need support. I don't have time to make a care plan, and I'm not sure anyone else will join the care team. And I say this because this quote makes it sound like the care plan and the care team has to be overly formal. And I am just wanting to mention that it doesn't have to be so formal. And I think that it can be however flexible or casual as you want it to be, but just have a plan and know who you can tap into is really the basic premise here. Real quick moment of reflection. As a working family caregiver, why might it be especially critical for you to have a plan? Why do you need a plan? I think for me personally, it's because just scheduling wise alone, I need to know who's doing what when I'm at work and can't do caregiving stuff, and vice versa. When I'm on duty to do whatever care task I'm assigned within my care team, I want to make sure to carve out time for that because that's important to me. How do I work around that? So for me, that's my moment of reflection on why it's really important to have some idea of a plan versus just sort of winging it all the time. There's going to be moments where you need to wing it. And because things are so unpredictable, that's okay. But we talk about this plan. So the first step is starting the conversation. This can be one of the most difficult steps. Amanda referenced in the legal aspects topic that having these end of life discussions and planning can be very emotional and stressful and awkward. There might be some really hard things to kind of talk through, and you don't want to imagine. But if you can sort of socialize and normalize a conversation and try to keep at it early and often, even when you encounter resistance, I think the better you are in terms of having a plan and not being sort of caught in a high emotional state when there's a trigger incident, for example, and you're thrown into your caregiving situation, like a hospitalization or an accident. You want to avoid needing to make any kind of like tough decisions when you're in that state. It would be nice to see and to know sort of where important things are, and having the conversation at least to know what, your loved one's wishes are and how they want to be cared for. So there's all different tips here. I won't read through any of them. One thing that I find helpful is looking for an opening. It may not be easy to just go straight at it. For some families, that might work. For others, you may need to kind of ease into it. I found personally helpful is when we heard about another family friend going through it, and it was kind of like lessons learned from their situation. Their family was caught off guard. Their family, it was a neighbor of ours. Their family's adult children were not ready, didn't know where anything was. And so you can kind of use that sort of third party, like outside experience to, raise the conversation and say, hey, I just want to be more prepared and not be in a similar situation. And they really encouraged us to kind of take these steps. These are things they wish they did. And maybe that'll help you. Are you surprised? So starting the conversation is also helpful because it helps manage expectations and clarify any wrong assumptions that people may have in terms of how care will be provided and paid for. So that financial conversation, when it comes to your loved one's assets and their income and what savings do they have to help pay for their long-term care, is going to be really important. You want to um, clarify that things that they may expect that would be covering long-term care actually don't. So most health insurance, including Medicare, pays for very little, if any, of the cost of care for a nursing home or assisted living residents, or any help with what we call ADLs, activities of daily living. Those are all in the long-term care umbrella, home health care, home health aides, custodial care. These are other terms that are referred to for help with things like bathing, dressing, meals, cleaning, transportation. All of that is not covered by medical insurance. You would need a separate, like, long-term care insurance plan and for it. And so just sort of managing that expectation. It is a common misconception that you think that Medicare pays for this, and it doesn't. And I think I saw someone in the chat sort of drop how much it is to live in an assisted facility for their loved one, and it can be high costs on a monthly basis. And if you don't have something like Medicaid or a veterans benefit that could help with that kind of stuff, and you think Medicare does, we just want to clarify it does not. So here's a resource for you to help you with these financial conversations that could be difficult. And I will not go into detail on this because the next session after the lunch break will go into deep dive. So if you're really wanting help with managing finances for a loved one when it comes to caregiving, or your own budget, so that you don't have to tap into out-of-pocket expenses, that $7,200 a year, we have tips for that in our next session. So here's a great workbook, though, that will help you. The next step is about forming your team. Let me know, who do you guys have on your team? And by team, again, it's not an overly formal thing. Is it your sibling? Is it your spouse? Is it if it's your mother you're taking for, is it your father? These are family members, but then there are also other people in your networks. Is it a neighbor? If you're a long distance caregiver, do you have a neighbor of your loved one helping out with some tasks like taking out the trash? They're part of your care team, believe it or not. And so there's different roles that people can take on and different people. You want to have a mix of different skill sets and talents, and match the tasks with the talent or desire or passion that that person has. And you can accept help. When people ask open-ended, even if you're not very close to them, maybe it's a church community member of your loved one, or a neighbor, like I said, or a friend, and they say, if you need help with anything, let me know. That's such an open-ended offer that sometimes we just say thanks, and we don't think about actually taking them up on it because you don't want to burden them. But people actually do really want to help. And the best way to do that is to think about some small tasks that can help lighten your load, because they all add up. Is it something like taking out the trash? Can you get my loved one's mail for them? Or can you help with grocery shopping or take them to an appointment here and there? Give them concrete examples of how they can help and take them up on those offers, because that can really add up to the time that you're spending on caregiving. And instead of caring, maybe you can spend more time being a family member. And that's sort of what we want to emphasize. You want to build a strong team, focus on the care recipient and involve them when it comes to decisions on who's going to be providing care and how they want to care. Make sure that you're putting them first and foremost, front and center in this conversation. And have clear and roles and responsibilities so that there's no miscommunication around who's doing what. And if you need to have backups, line that all up, just like you may be doing at work. If you're a project manager, you are assigning staff like certain tasks and certain team members roles and responsibilities, and this is kind of that. But again, it doesn't have to be that formal. So step 3 is about making a plan. It does not need to be extensive or fancy. We just want you to not have to be thrown off and caught off guard if you are put into a caregiving situation and not have had any discussions or know any sense of a plan in place. This is really an exercise in preparedness, and again, it doesn't have to be someone who's not yet in caregiving mode. If you already are a caregiver, and it's never too late, is basically what we're saying. It's never too late to make a plan, to adjust the plan. Caregiving evolves, so maybe you have a plan and you just need to revisit it. So meet with the team and involve them in creating the plan, and make sure that the care recipient is front and center and part of that conversation and that team, if they're, able to be. Assess the goals and needs. How big of a problem are you working with? And how do you address that? Ensure that each key area has a clear owner. That's all talking about roles and responsibilities. Agree on how to communicate. Are you guys going to use a joint group text thread, or is it by email? Or is there like a shared calendar that you can use for coordination? Leverage technology to see how that can help you make care coordination easier across different team members. And keep your care team engaged and positive. I mentioned this multiple times, include the care recipient. Start with the short-term goals and urgent things and sort of more defined tasks that need to be done, and then go from there. Maybe you can't have an overly extensive plan long-term wise, so you'll just start with short-term, and that's completely fine. Communicate clearly. Respect others' limits. That's referring to sometimes there's a lot of dynamics in a family relationship that come into play. I think I saw Veronica post a comment earlier about family dynamics and expectations of other people. Sometimes we project what we want other people to do. And so this is about acknowledging that everyone has their own different levels of capacity as well as ability, both when it comes to the actual physical tasks at hand, as well as the ability to sort of deal with this emotionally. Everyone has sort of their own emotional coping mechanisms, and for some, this all might be too much, and they're, just sort of protecting their health. And so, but at other times, you kind of get, you can feel upset when someone doesn't feel like they're stepping up or contributing. And so we're all coming sort of from different places and manage things differently. And so manage your emotions. Don't forget about your own social emotional health as well. Step 4 is about finding support. These can include all types of support, community resources, government resources. And when we say government, I'm saying local, county level, state level, federal government level. Are any of these resources something that you're not aware of that you want to tap into? And it could actually be very helpful. Things like Meals on Wheels, or there are local area agencies on aging across the US. If you can find your local, what we call AAA, those are really helpful to get started when it's trying to figure out what government resources are available to you. Professional help. Do you need a medical team involved, a nurse? Do you need to have someone who's medically trained that can help you? Or is it something like a counselor? Do you need a therapist to kind of help you get through this emotional time? Employer-based supports, do not forget about those. If you are working and you have benefits, there are benefits that you could leverage for caregiving, even if they're not labeled as being a caregiving benefit. A lot of existing benefits that you might have in the companies that you work for have a caregiving applicability to them. So things like leave, things like an employee assistance program, take a look at those, as well as the employer benefits of anyone else on the team. If your spouse is on the team, do they have benefits that could help? Do you have your siblings, like, do they have any employer benefits? Just leverage it all and tap into it. And a lot of times those benefits are underutilized. And so talk with your HR people because a lot of them want them to be used. There might be retiree benefits for your loved one, even, or yourself if you're retired. And then make sure to find support for you too. Here are other tasks that we find people using other resources to help support. Transportation services, meal and grocery support, things like as easy as the grocery store apps where you can buy and pre-order and do curbside pickup. Like, will that help save you on time if time is really what you need, or stress? Adult daycare services can provide that respite, that break that some caregivers need. Social work, hospice care, really learn about these supports. Hospice and palliative care are two options that can provide support. Faith-based support, community groups, and housing with supportive services. So step 5, caring for yourself. This is our last step in the framework, and this is not meant to be something you do last. This step is intended for you to do throughout every stage of your caregiving journey. Don't forget about yourself. There's several realms of health and well-being that we want you to consider. We talked about this already, and there'll be more in depth about this later on, but your financial health. Your financial health and security is really important. Your physical health, are you getting your preventive exams? Are you doing your checkups? How's your diet, exercise, sleep going for you? Your mental health, stress, anxiety levels, depression rates. A lot of this can impact caregivers. And then your social health. As I mentioned, caregivers can feel very isolated and lonely. And if you weren't aware, I think the US Surgeon General proclaimed that we have a loneliness epidemic in the US right now. And we know that that impacts older adults significantly, but also their caregivers, because sometimes you're just focused on that and you don't have a minute to connect with others, which is why I think this session is really great. So thank you to UMD for bringing you all together for this ability for social connection and learn about other alumni who are caregivers as well. There's people here, as you can see, who can relate to your situation. And I think that as much as you don't want people going through the same hardships you may be going through, just know that you're not alone. Research actually shows that investing in yourself, your own well-being, improves the health outcomes of your care recipient. And so if you keep putting yourself in the back burner, actually realize that that impacts your loved one. You may be so focused on your loved one, but I always say you can't pour from an empty cup, and your quality of care that you end up providing to your loved one will be compromised if you burn yourself out. So these are things that we want you to consider building into your care plans. Asking others to own specific areas. So that role responsibility task within the care team piece and in the care plan stage. Really identify who can do what and delegate. You don't have to do everything, hopefully. If you're by yourself, I know it's really difficult, but outsource, there's other ways to kind of think about what other people can take on. Find a caregiver support group. The Facebook AARP Family Caregiver Facebook discussion group, I think, is a great example of an online source of support, as Amanda mentioned in the last session, and we'll continue to reiterate that source, that resource, because people are very vulnerable on there. It's very lightly moderated by AARP, but we'll chime in for resources or discussion if needed. But for the most part, it's driven by other caregivers like yourself. And so that's one example of an online group. There might be one in your community or in your, if you're faith-based groups, disease management nonprofits like the Alzheimer's Association or American Cancer Society will often have specific caregiver support groups that could be very helpful, because you might have some really specific situations that tied to the disease condition that your loved one may be suffering from that you're helping them with. And knowing that other people are going through the exact similar thing can be really helpful to you. I mentioned respite care. Respite's all about having a break. Is there a way for you to have a temporary break from your caregiving? Is it something like an adult daycare service? Is it a paid caregiver that you can bring in, like a home health aide or a companion, to give yourself time to take a breather and have that moment of respite, is what we talk about. Using your benefits fully, we mentioned employer being one. There might be government benefits, and also look into the benefits of the care recipient. Do they have retiree benefits, veterans benefits? Did they have government programs that they are eligible for? So definitely look at those, because that might take one source of stress off your plate. Talk to your manager if you are working. Talk to your manager and let your supervisor know, and be proactive with solutions when work and caregiving seem to be coming head to head. Tell your own doctors, talk to your primary care physicians about your situation, or any other specialists that you may have that you think would be helpful, or counselors or mental health providers as well. Because sometimes there are sort of physical manifestations of stress when it comes to your own health and your own body. Use outside caregiving services. So can you outsource? Can you find an agency? If you're able to afford that, is that helpful to find that support? Okay, I mentioned that we want to make these sessions as actionable as possible, and I'm sorry about all the talking that I just did. The last thing we want to do is give caregivers homework, but if you're just looking for a place to start, here are some options. We gave you the framework. I think one thing is that you could talk with a family member. That start the conversation is a great place to start. And if you know it's going to be a difficult conversation, how can you peel the onion and just go layer by layer and start sort of smaller before you kind of go straight? And maybe practice this conversation with someone else on who might be your care team or your spouse or loved one or partner before, if you know and anticipate it might be difficult. Another actionable item for you all today is to share the electronic version of that family caregiving guide that we had up front. I'll show you the link again. Maybe use that as your way to start the conversation, to set up time to talk about it, or maybe use that to adjust and tweak an existing plan or arrangement that you guys have in place that's not working for you. If your caregiving is still not as efficient as you want it to be, and it's still causing a lot of stress, and you see sort of problem areas, how can you problem solve? Maybe this is one way where you can kind of put everything down on paper and see where your gaps are or where your problem issue areas are, and hopefully you all can come together and solve for that. The last experiment we have is, again, this should not be last, it's last but not least. If you are already in an intense caregiving role, can you work the plan backwards? I had step 5 as self-care, caring for yourself. But again, that doesn't have to be the last step. In fact, we think it's a step ingrained in all of the steps that we had in our framework. But what's one thing you can do for yourself, for your own well-being? And think about that. Do you need a spa day? Do you need a sleep? Sleep is very important. Maybe you just need to take a day and take a nap or catch up on sleep. Is it related to your mental health or social emotional health, like actually having a night out, going on a date or meeting with some friends, making that time. So commit to something that you can do, and it doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe it's 10 minutes going for a walk outside with your neighbor. So I want to hold you all accountable. When can you make time to try one of your experiments? I hope these experiments are not going to take a lot of your time. I certainly am someone who feels like I don't have a minute in the day, but I do. I have 10 minutes, and if it's going to help me in the long run, I will do it. And so think about when you can make time to try an experiment. Is it sharing the family caregiving guide? Is it starting the conversation? Is it something you're going to do for your own self-care? How can you prioritize it and add timelines and dates to things? Because that will make you feel a little bit more accountable, and hopefully things will actually get done if you put the dates to that. So we are now at the point of Q&A. And I'm not sure if anything came up in the Q&A or in the chat itself. I need a minute to kind of scroll through. Kara, welcome to shoot any my way if you think of any or saw any.
There was a lot of conversation. Let's see,
Any comments you want to share that
a
was
lot of
really, yeah.
comments. I might ask, I mean, Veronica was having a lot of conversation. Veronica, I might be interested in you popping on to see if there's anything that you, let's see, can I put you on a spotlight? I don't know. Let's see. A lot of people just sharing that they are, like Yanni says, I use the employee assistance program through my job for caregiver support. They sent me a free book on caregiving and planning resources, a list of local resources. Later on, I use the legal services.
Wow, sounds like a great employer with great benefits.
Yeah, can we work there? There have been folks who, had some downfalls from actually caregiving. I know that that came through. Um, Someone whose mom needed assisted living for a while. Health insurance did not cover some small nursing care after rehab, after hospitalization. I know Veronica shared some follow-up information
Right.
about income. So
Yeah,
all
a
really
lot.
good. Yeah.
That's great. And if anyone thinks of any throughout the day or the rest of our time in this hour, feel free to drop it in and let us know. I have lots of resources I can share. We can maybe go through those. And again, come back to circle back on questions. But thank you for sharing. I'm seeing, these stories, and thank you for being part of the day today and taking time. Because I know the last thing that caregivers have is free time. So we do acknowledge your time spent today. And thanks to Veronica for chiming in and sharing some of these resources. These are just some FAQs to think about how to overcome resistance. How do I talk with my manager about caregiving? We have lots of resources on all the stuff. If any of these prompt a question for you all, let us know. How can you engage your reluctant family members? I talked about people having their own limits. How can I protect my financial health? You'll learn a lot about that in the next session. So here are resources. One more time, our AARP Family Caregiving Guide, one more time this hour, rather, because I'm sure it's going to be shared again later. AARP.org/working care. This is where we have all the different transcreated versions. It's available electronically as well as in hard copy. If you're kind of old school like me, I like having the physical version. These are sort of like workbooks in a lot of sense. So maybe the hard copy can be helpful to you because you can actually put pen to paper and complete some of the worksheets. In the back of this book, it has things like medication list for your loved one, important contact information. You can put like all their healthcare providers on there and the phone numbers, where they bank. That's helpful. All the way down to where important documents are located and/or the task list and roles that you can assign. It goes down to trash pickup days. I mentioned that. Sometimes you don't even think about those kinds of things, but they're things that you need help with. The financial workbook you'll hear about later today, but here's the link. It's available at aarp.org/care money guide. That also is something we have in multiple versions, military veteran, Chinese, and Spanish. But Heather Ainsworth will talk more about that later today. I talked about giving yourself a break. Make sure to give yourself grace and be kind to yourself. It's hard to do everything and you will burn out. So let's prevent that exhaustion, that burnout. Here is an article about creating a respite care plan and how you can share it with others and sort of line it up. Maybe be preventive when it comes to knowing that after a certain amount of time, you're going to need a break. It is when sort of your tank goes to empty. Let's create that plan to back up. I'm not going to go through all of these, but tons and tons of links here and resources. We have the Facebook group, which we've mentioned a couple times. It is very, very helpful. We have online threads like in our caregiving community and phone numbers, and then just more stuff about the landscape of family caregiving in the US. If you want to know a little bit more about these stats, if you want to make a case for your caregiving situation, let's say at work, when you're talking to your manager, like just creating awareness that family caregiving is going to impact everyone at some point in their lives. We see demographic changes. The available number of caregivers, family caregivers to care recipients is going to decrease through time. That means like the ratio of available family members to take care of a loved one is decreasing through the years as people are having less children or no children or having children later in life. And so this really is going to become an issue when it comes to long-term care, and caregivers are that backbone. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, we have links there. Here's workplace tools, things to bring to your company or your organization, your employer. We have toolkits on how to create an employee resource group, which is sort of like a support group in your workplace. We have tips for managers, guides on how employers can be more supportive. We have things on the right side, hot topics, home fit guide. If you or your loved one is planning to age in place, how can they do so safely? How to make the environment safe, all the way down to things like room by room, the grab bars in the bathroom, the tile size and slickness of the tiles. That all is something to consider as you're preparing for caregiving. And do you need to make modifications to the home? Will the home be able to manage that, or do you need to find a different place to age? And of course, the two bread and butter resources we have here. We have a nice little sampling of all of the resources in what we call the Family Caregiving Kit. It's only in hard copy here. If you'd like one, if you'd like a hard copy, send an email to askcaregiving@aarp.org, and we will ship that over to you for free. It's sort of one of our offerings here at AARP, all part of our social mission work. We want to equip you with the resources you need to have your caregiving journey a success and to make it easier. I don't know if we can ever say we're going to make your caregiving journey easy, but make it easier. Maybe these resources will be helpful to you. So send an email with your shipping address and how many you would like. And that includes sort of that sampling of the key resources that we talked about. So one last ask of you today during my hour with you all is, what's one key takeaway that you can use this week? Was this helpful to you at all? I know it was a lot of talking and there's going to be more of that, but I really love the engagement in the chat. Thank you for being willing to share your comments and stories. But let us know what was helpful to you today. What's something that you think you're going to apply? And maybe you typing it in the chat here will make you accountable for it. You know, we talked about maybe setting dates and having goals and not putting yourself in the back burner. How can you prioritize it? Or if you've been avoiding the conversation on caregiving with your loved one, like how are you going to start? Was something helpful about the different aspects of health, financial health and wellness and mental, social, emotional, physical? Let us know what was helpful to you, because that always helps us as we deliver more of these sessions. How else can we help? You had our email address for requesting the kit, and I'll flash that again. That's askcaregiving@aarp.org. I put that in the next slide. Here are other topics that AARP provides education on through the employer network. If you want to bring these sessions to your own organizations, if you are working and share it with other working family caregivers, let us know. Connect with us, connect your HR person, or if you have an ERG already, an employee resource group. We have a lot more topics than the ones being offered today. If you want to do deeper dives on anything, happy to help. This is our program series. Here is our email address. Veronica, thank you for dropping that link for our employer sessions. If any of you, again, want to request it, you'll see that sign up page on the chat right now. It's available at aarp.org/caregiving workshop. But we have our email address if you have any other questions, and some links here. So thank you again. Our takeaways, the 3 things that we really want to emphasize that we think and have heard are helpful to caregivers, are here on the screen. But I will say thank you. Thank you for sharing the Friday morning with us, and appreciate your attention. And I hope that this was helpful to you all.
Thank you, Trisha. We actually did have just a couple questions come in. So one, Jennifer is sounds like a very giving person. She said, are there any ways for those of us not currently caregiving, but have extra time, and would like to help those that need it?
Oh my gosh, you're like a dream comment
An
here.
angel, yeah.
Right? I mean, everyone's looking for volunteers in terms of like nonprofits. AARP has an extensive volunteer program, and there's certainly ways to help in your community. We have several state offices, as you know. We have AARP Maryland, and wherever you are, we have lots of opportunities within AARP if you're interested, but then look in your community for, again, those nonprofit disease management groups like an Alzheimer's Association and American Heart Association. I know they're always looking for volunteers. I've personally, in the past, volunteered at a local assisted living facility in my community. They needed drivers to take people to run errands, and I found that very rewarding. So that's a way to give back, I felt, when and it also provides social connection to some of the residents whose families may live very far. And again, they're not driving, so they feel even more isolated. So that's a real specific example. You can volunteer in healthcare settings like hospitals, where they do sort of like little social visits, all different kinds of things. So lots of opportunities, and I would just encourage you to find what your passion is and sort of look where you can do it. And there's both online as well as in-person opportunities. So it just depends what you're interested in. I think we have a site, it's called createthegood.org, if I'm not mistaken, Veronica. Correct me if I'm wrong. Createthegood.org is a great way to volunteer with AARP.
It's great, thank you. And then 2 resource questions, and one is from me and the other one is from Evelyn. So Evelyn asked if there's any resources for power of attorney.
Power of attorney, that would have been a Amanda
Legal.
Singleton
Okay.
question, and I think Amanda provided her information, so I think we can look at that. AARP.org/caregiving does have, I think, a legal and financial section where we might be able to find that, but I will always direct you to a professional. So
Yes.
Go to a lawyer, a legal professional. There's an association called the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. That's NAELA, NAELA. I think they could also be a really good resource for you.
Awesome. And then mine is resources on, you mentioned outfitting the home, and I was wondering, it might be the finance session about like loans and how to, or like I know that there's grants and stuff like that out there, and I just didn't know if you had any information on
I'm
how
not
that
sure
works. Probably state to state.
Yeah, it varies. I think there's things like sometimes there might be sort of tax credits for things like home modifications, but it does vary by state, I believe. Loans, I don't think we go
Or
too deep
grants,
into that.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like
Grants.
Veronica said the grant passed in Maryland effective July 2025, and
There we
yes,
go.
states vary.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah,
There you
it's
go.
a thought that I had recently about a bathroom situation. So can all relate.
There's
Um,
an organization of people called, I think they specialize in universal design, which is about making the home sort of age friendly and safe. I think there's an association related to that. So if you hear that kind of terminology, that comes into place. But that it is a very popular topic, outfitting the home to be able to make it safe for your loved one or for yourself if you think that's, the place where you want to be.
right. Got it. Well, thank you. We are right on the money, 11:30. Thank you to everyone for your conversations in the chat and for Trisha. We now have a lunch break, so that'll be for the next hour. You are welcome to sign off and rejoin us at 12:30, but you're also welcome to stay on and ask questions to a few of our AARP representatives and chat with your fellow TERT.